Well, hello and welcome to another episode of the Christian Reeve Podcast. Today's guest is a B2B copywriter, teacher, and much more, all the way from Dallas, Texas. His name is Nathan Bennett. Welcome to the show, Ben. Nathan,
Thank you
how
for
are you
having me
doing?
on. Doing well, thank you.
I was about to announce you by your second name there, like, yes, Bennett. I'll just ignore your first name. But anyway, how are you doing, sir?
Doing all right. It's cloudy out there today, which is my favorite kind of weather.
Really? We're going to talk about the weather.
Well,
we're going straight for small talk.
A sentence or two about it is nice, and then we move right on to more substantial things.
Nah, I kid you. I'm just in jest, man. I know. I envy the weather you have out there in Manchester. It's intriguing. It's rainy a lot of the time. All of the music here, at least back in the day, used to talk about it and like how it always rains in Manchester. But no, I've noticed that certainly over the last couple of years as well, it's been getting progressively warmer, and the winters are getting a bit cooler, and it is what it is. But yeah. But the first thing I want to talk about before we get into your life and everything that you do is that voice. I mentioned it off camera, but yeah, I asked you, I said, do you do, audiobooks or anything like that? And you said no. And you seem surprised.
I do a podcast on modern Chinese history.
Sure.
But I mean, like I've listened to podcasts by people who maybe don't have the most swoon-inducing voices, but still, it's like they're not unpleasant to listen to, and they're talking about things I'd like to know about. So I'm talking about, like on my podcast, I talk about things I like to talk about. The fact that I would have a good sounding voice is like, okay, that's good to know about.
Yeah, no, I'm just surprised because I mean, for me, well, I guess I pay attention to these things just because I'm same here, fan of podcasts, fan of, I like to do voice acting and stuff like that. And I was just surprised. I was like, surely this guy is using this professionally. I mean, it's a very soothing voice, I don't know. To me, it's like the sort of voice you might hear if you're listening to one of those like go to sleep audiobooks or like very like relaxing vibes, ASMR. I don't know, something like that, It's,
I guess I could try putting together an ASMR YouTube track or something. I don't know if I could do the 8 hours of something. I guess I could try reading Moby Dick out loud.
Why not?
Well, that could actually take about 24 hours. There's a Moby Dick marathon in New Bedford, Massachusetts. That'd be nice to get to at some point. But that, anyway.
I get you, man. I get you. Well, in that sort of initial introduction and your riposte to that, you mentioned that you do a podcast on Chinese history. What can you tell us about that podcast?
Well, it's modern Chinese history through the lens of Chinese revolutionary movements from about 1839, the First Opium War, to the modern day. Partly I'm trying to get China out of my system. Partly it's, I lived in China for 7 years. And so there's all the things you can't quite say, and there's all the things that the foreigners talk to each other about. But, like you can't really have, it's really hard to have frank conversations with Chinese people about Chinese history because ordinary Chinese people are like most ordinary people. They don't know anything about history. But then Westerners who do know about history don't always know anything about Chinese history. So it's partly to bring it more to, hey, you, like bring the really important stuff that goes on behind the news. Because my podcast is called Chinese Revolutions. ChineseRevolutions.com is the site. It's like if you're asking, how did things get to be the way they are today? It's almost too late. Okay, it's helpful to have the background snippet in the news about how things came to be. But like, if you're asking, how did it get to be like this? It's a bit too late to be able to use those insights to like help solve the problem. And I hope there aren't any problems with China, but I'd like to maybe contribute to greater understanding before there is anything.
You talked about the history, in the sense that there is, what's written about and what maybe the West knows, but then there is, the reality. And then obviously what you said about people not maybe knowing of their history in China, or not at least being able to speak on it. Do you feel that maybe a lot of the history over there is being, what would be the right word? Well, okay, let me put it this way. We know for a fact that history in general is always rewritten in a way to kind of fit the agenda of every nation, whatever they're trying to achieve. And this has been done and is still done over time continuously. So, there is the truth, what really happened, and then there's what you'll read about maybe 50 years later, right? But in terms of a lot of this history that you've been studying, what you've been understanding, and then obviously your time there, which we'll get into in detail in a bit, but I just want to kind of get your thoughts on that. Like, is there a lot being done to kind of censor it or change it or twist it?
I took an anthropology class in college, and one of the things that this one tribe, the Yanomamo, Yanomami, I forget exactly what the right ending is for that one. It's not any language that I speak, so my apologies to the people who do know. It's a very famous tribe known for being studied in anthropology. Well, so when you have one of these groups reconciling with another one of these groups, they start talking about all the family connections that they have that they had shoved aside because they had been feuding for, years or something. So that's one of the things you see happening with history. So you kind of have all the facts somewhere, and as it becomes convenient, I actually wrote a letter to the Russian ambassador in the United States here to, please urge your government to stop the war in Ukraine. So I started off with, Russia supported the side of the North in the American Civil War. You helped us preserve it. So that they, so I was bringing out something from history to try to, I'm just going to say the thing that's faster to say. So like trying to butter them up before saying, please urge your government to stop this war. So that's one side that building a historical narrative draws on. So there's all the stuff that people know just around the corner of their awareness. But then there's also there's the narrative that whoever's in power wants to push. Right now, it seems like in America, there's I have all the half opinions that I get from all the YouTube videos I might watch, so I'm gonna put this with a big asterisk. It's okay, like somebody wants to say that all of American history is basically racist, and it's okay, yeah, racism is kind of like one of America's original sins that we have to deal with, but it's that's not the whole story. So there's telling a coherent central narrative. You kind of have to keep retelling that story every generation, because you reckon with things from the past, but you also have to say, okay, the good things from the past were good things. So it's all of these things all together, and having an open, continuing engagement with history. It's kind of all of these things at once. In China, part of the problem is they only emphasize the stuff that supports what the government is talking about right at the moment. So the Taiping Rebellion, which I'm getting into in maybe 2 or 3 months on my podcast when I get through all the background episodes, under Chairman Mao, okay, peasant revolt, that's great. Right now, peasant revolt is not great because the Communist Party is the established regime. They have had a number of successions from the founding, so they're a stable dynasty, if you will, and they'd not like to have peasant revolt. So they don't really want to talk about the Taiping as peasant rebellion forerunners to the current thing. They'd maybe like to talk about somebody on the Qing side who helped organize things to suppress revolt. It's like that. That's one of the things that happens. When the a politically inconvenient side is, meets the modern,
No, I mean, to me, the way you outline it, I mean, that's I think that's generally the case with most countries. Well, with China, obviously, to an extreme degree, but many countries will do that. But companies too, actually. And that was the kind of the thing that I was thinking about was, are you familiar with the WWE, the wrestling company in America? Yeah. So as you were talking about China and the government and everything there, it weirdly reminded me of WWE and what they do. And just bear with me here. So one thing that WWE does, because it's built up this big business empire over many, many years, and now it's finally getting to kind of trade on the value of the past, so the 80s, 90s, 2000s, Attitude Era, etc., right? All these different eras in wrestling, right? But here's the important bit, the reason why I bring this up. For a while, they had their own wrestling network on just like a streaming platform. And they've since put it on hold, I guess, because they've got like this big deal with this company called Peacock that streams their stuff. But that's besides the point. What's happening now, and has been happening for a long time, to be honest, is that they'll do like their own documentaries. You see where this is going, or their own retellings of things, or they'll even go back and edit things, change things, whatever. And basically what they're doing is rewriting history. And they do that all the time. And the tricky thing with that is obviously, all of us fans growing up know what really happened, and we'll call them out on it. And we'll be like, well, that's ridiculous because this, and this happened. And you've forgotten about all of these things. You're just trying to tell this story because you're trying to make yourselves look good, or you're trying to tell this particular narrative. Now, bringing it back to what you were saying about China and the government, it feels like they're kind of doing that. As you said, they tell the convenient parts of history or push upon certain things in order to fit their narrative, in order to tell the history they want to tell, which by definition is not history. It's just a series of lies, a false narrative, a story. It's just telling stories. And this has been done throughout history and probably will continue to. And it leaves us not really knowing what has actually happened in the past unless we were there and experienced it. So, you know what I mean? It's a difficult position to be in. And I can't even imagine what it must be like for the Chinese people. I mean, just, we hear about what it's like living over there, and we'll get into your personal experience, which I think is really going to be key in this, and is going to, because one thing I found really interesting when I was looking you up was, here's an American going over to China, living there for an extended period of time. You're going to be treated a certain way. It's going to be a different experience for you versus your average Chinese person living there, right? But moreover, and this again was another reason why I wanted you to have you on my shows, because there are a lot of schemes. I don't know how else to put it. Like, for example, there are a lot of different teaching courses or opportunities to basically work in China for extended periods of time, like a couple of years, which are often funded by companies or schools or universities or whatever in China. And this isn't just something that happens in China, it happens in many other countries around the world. But it's intriguing that it happens in China, given that there's so much done to kind of keep people in the bubble, restrict, censor, etc. But they're still allowing people from the West to come over and be there. But you're going to know that it's got to be on their terms, right? It's got to be. And this is what I find interesting, because years ago I was considering doing teaching there, and I ultimately decided against it. But I can see the allure and the appeal of it. But I also knew, even back then, I knew that if I would go there, I would be having a particular experience. And I read a lot of, varying experiences, many of which were positive and some which were negative. But ultimately, you're protected. As a foreigner going over there, you are protected. And
that's a very good insight.
Right. But you're the one who actually went there. So let's start at the beginning. Talk to us about your motivation to move to China. Why did you want to go there?
Well, my first interest in China was, I'm going to keep some of the details fuzzy, but was like Christian missionary purposes. Like, now I started with teaching English because that's kind of an entry-level job for cross-cultural stuff anyway. So it's not like I was out preaching in the countryside or something. But then I changed from Protestant to Orthodox, so that totally wiped out any religious stuff, like any religious job stuff that was happening. So that was like a big reset button. So it's a crucial background detail just for me personally. So there's like with the religious side, there's, okay, we're going there to do some material good, hoping that they catch on spiritually, but then there's all these laws about how you can and can't do stuff religiously. So like there's so there's this halfway kind of doing but not quite doing, trying not to get caught as a certain thing, but also trying not to lie about why you're there. And
okay.
So it's like, no, I'm not coming as Mr. Missionary, but at the same time, like, I want you to know that I'm here because God loves you, and this, that, the other thing.
Did you ever get caught trying to, let's say, spread the gospel? Let's put it that way.
No, I never really got close enough to actually like I might have had personal conversations about some of that, but like I wasn't doing that professionally. Like that that okay. Wasn't like, I was there as an English teacher, like for 2 years as part of a like religious organization.
Okay, right.
2 different years. Like, so the government knew who it was, they knew what it, but they were very, very scrupulous about obeying the rules. And like sometimes even like a Communist Party member would say, like, okay, yeah, if this is Christmas, like talk more about the religious side. Like, okay, all right. Because it's cultural information. Like Christmas is about Santa, right? Like, no, there's the whole religious story about why it happens at all.
So what were some of the stricter rules that you were facing? Like that's interesting. Like, and you said that sometimes when the communist members of the party were there present, so that kind of makes it sound like an uncomfortable situation to be in, with that person in the room and you know who they are and you're like, you can't really be yourself. Like, what's the deal there?
Yeah, there's there might be like where I was there might be like 2 or 3 party members who were working with us.
Okay.
So it's not like it's more like if they hear something, they might tell somebody, but it's not like somebody watching every move, questioning every apostrophe. It's but also people join the party because it helps them get ahead in life. It's another so somebody was fired, sent back to America for like doing a baptism he was pressured into doing. So
Okay.
Okay, you're not going to do that. But if if in a volunteer capacity you're serving in one of the Chinese government overseen churches, okay, that's something that is regulated. That's something that's official and out in the open. That's not like, and in Chinese history, you have a lot of weird little cults that wind up turning into civil wars that kill tens of millions of people, like the Taiping Rebellion. So when the government is not real interested in having undercover religious work, there's historical background to why that is.
So, like, if someone does something wrong, like in the case of that teacher, or just other similar examples,
Yeah.
like, what's the kind of communication process for that? So, like, that there's someone either present, or that you're aware of their presence. Basically, does someone like come up to you and come in your ear and say, "Actually, you're not allowed to say this, or you must say this"? Like, what's communicated to you?
There's different ways that pressure is brought on. This is things I've heard of. Like, nothing like this has ever really happened to me.
Okay.
I don't know if I was shy, cautious, petrified.
Right.
Conservative is the nice word for what I can be sometimes. Shy is still not so bad, but terrified. Anyway, maybe the government will call the Chinese people you're working with, and they'll tell you to knock it off. So you're the Chinese person who helps you interface with the community, like they'll tell you to stop. Or one thing, it's called like the police will invite you for tea and you'll be paying for it, and they'll tell you, they'll ask you questions about who and what you are. And
but this never happened to you. This just happened to other people.
Yeah, this is things I've heard about.
Okay.
So you could be deported, or a visa not renewed. Part of the question is how you get your visa to be there. Some people will dishonestly come as students, but wait a minute, why are you a student in a rural area studying Chinese when you could go to a very nice university like in Beijing or Shanghai or some other place where it's all touristy, and they have why are you studying Chinese out in far western China where like nobody's here, and then you're preaching in the countryside on the weekend? Or somebody tries to set up a non-governmental organization, and maybe they are doing some legitimate relief work, but they're also doing religious work on the side. I mean, and then also people do try to come in directly in a religious capacity. So like any one of those ways, like your visa could like be not renewed, or just cut short. You're leaving, next week.
Damn. It's no messing around with these guys.
Yeah.
You mentioned sort of the way you put it was sort of feeling sort of terrified to react, or like, so you were you basically like living in fear the whole time? I mean, because obviously you wanted to be there. You've gone out of your way to go over there. You have a purpose. You have like a mission and everything, and you got like a job that you're doing as well to help people. But like the way you make it sound kind of sounds like,
well, there's also just me personally. I'm not.
Okay.
I would rather speak in front of 1,000 people than speak to one stranger, because like, okay, speaking in front of 1,000 people is like, okay, like entertainment, this is fun, but I'm one of the weird people who likes public speaking. But I tend to be very like shy or cautious. So that's like a lot of this is just me being me. Like there were thoughts that occurred to me that I never acted on. Like, I could interview somebody about that. I didn't because I was afraid of, being caught or something.
I get that. What was like the weirdest thing that one of these officials said to you, or like, did you hear anything that was like out of place, strange? I mean, obviously it's going to be different anyway because you're in a different nation, different country, etc. But like, yeah, anything that you heard that was weird, like caught you off guard, something like that.
Maybe the closest. I mean, like there was one time I got a call from my boss when I was teaching at a Chinese university. He said, like, don't end class early, I think. Well, okay, in that case, it's one of the Chinese people who was looking in on the class who I didn't know. I didn't know who it was. Yeah, that was actually some supervisor or something who reported it to my boss. Like that's just part of the context I wasn't aware of, but okay, you got me fair and square on that one. That's, do the job for the right time.
Okay, back it up a second. So like,
yeah,
you've said to your class, like, oh, we're going to finish maybe 10 minutes early today or something,
yeah.
right? And then you suddenly get a call.
No, not like maybe later that week, maybe a month later.
Oh, so you did that, but then you get, okay, I see it. You get like a call a week later, basically telling you like, do not do that again.
He was much nicer about it. Like one of the things you have to do in China is read between the lines. Like if somebody's bringing it up, like it's not just a suggestion.
Well, I think that much I'm getting, but yeah, it just sounds very deeply serious in a unnerving way is probably the way I could put it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's one of the ones that I like. I wouldn't be so terrified of because I mean, like, okay, if your boss at your job in your home country tells you to, shape up a certain thing, do it a different way, that's how it goes. Unless like you have a totally like a total creative role where you're the creative genius. Unless you've got that, they can ask you for something different. So like that wasn't so much of a problem for me this time. When I was working in Chinese media, that was about 2 years. There were just certain topics that, that's not going to be printed. Like, so like, okay, I stopped having ideas then, but that's a different.
What kind of things are a no-go? What do they tell you? Like they shoot down straight away?
Like I proposed an idea. This is more like a colleague said, I don't think that would be printed. Like I wanted to use the life of the last emperor of China, who was a child in, I think it was 1911 when the last dynasty was ended and the Republic of China was founded. And then it was a long bumpy ride until 1949 when the People's Republic was founded. Well, his whole life, like some of what he was trying to do was trying to stay ready for if the empire was going to come back. But he went over to the Japanese for a while, and then he was captured by the Russians when they came into the Pacific War in World War II. And then the communists re-educated him, and sorry, calls all the time here. The communists re-educated him, and he lived out the rest of his life as a gardener in Beijing. So his life is a very interesting index of modern Chinese history. Now I'm going to have to do that on my own time for my own podcast. But that's not something they were interested in exploring. Or like we were redoing the kind of rebooting the publication I worked for. And I suggested the idea, like, why not show the traditional Chinese date for whatever the day is? They said, that's a good idea, but it has some political implications. Part of the reason being is like various rebellions take certain meaning from whatever the traditional Chinese date is. Like this astrological sign is the current dynasty. This is the next one. We identify with the next one. So like, okay, everybody rebel on that day, kind of thing. Like, so that's why that didn't appear in a cultural magazine.
Yeah, I mean, the vibe I'm getting with what you're saying, and also everything I've read over the years, and I always take everything with a pinch of salt because it's our media, which is always going to be fraught with, it's going to be sensationalized. It's not ever going to be accurate because unless you're there, you don't know, right? But one thing that does seem to be the case is that, everything goes through that political filter to a crazy degree. It's like with what you were talking about there with regards to various things you can or can't sort of print. Seems to me like people are either scared or wary of what they put out there. Like you can't maybe pursue like a passion project without making sure that it kind of fits with what the government's saying, basically.
Yeah, there's some different ways I've heard that people deal with that. Like for one thing is, if you're talking in English to an English speaking audience, there will be fewer, like the government probably won't try to shut you, like because there's the government trying to keep control over the Chinese language audience.
Mm-hmm.
And then the government doing whatever it does for the foreign audience. So if you're bringing up some problem about the Chinese system to a foreign audience in a foreign language, not for domestic Chinese consumption, that's not so much of a problem because they figure that the foreigners are going to say bad things anyway. Whereas if you're trying to get a domestic audience to question the legitimacy of the party, that is where they're going to start hitting.
Okay. But I will say this, because I've definitely seen this already. Online, there has been a lot of slander from outside of China towards, the system that they have, the CCCP. That's right, isn't it? CCCP.
Well, oh God.
Is that right? Three C's?
Well, there's
that's the main organization.
No, the I think CCCP.
Yeah.
I believe that's the Russian Cyrillic abbreviation for USSR. Because C is actually S, and then P is actually R.
There's a nation. What is it? Some sort of organization exists in China as either a wing of the government or the actual government itself, which is goes by that name, does it not?
I forget what like the CCPPC or CCCP, the Chinese Consultative People's Political Conference or something.
That one, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there is that body.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about. So like that particular body has been releasing videos with English dubs or speaking in English, sort of fighting back against what Westerners are saying and saying like, oh no, none of this horrible stuff happens. What do you mean? It's great here, and it's some of it is how can I put this? It's crazy to watch it. It's like it's delusional. It's trying to kind of paint this idea that nothing ever terrible happens here, when in actuality it's a very different story.
That's actually one of the weaknesses that I see in Chinese media, where it's like, okay, like I've been around, like they sent me a handful of places, like I've seen the bridge over this enormous river gorge. It was a gorgeous. I've like, okay, the bridge is real. I've ridden the trains all over China. seen the road that used to be mud, now it's paved. I've seen the farm machinery instead of farm animals. I've seen they can grow tea now and make a lot of money instead of growing rice just for their own consumption. Yes, I've seen this with my own eyes. It's all there. It's all real. It's all happening. Yes, that's true. That's all true. Now there's some way in which they're showing you the nice side instead of the bad side, but there's also like, okay, yeah, it's true. Terrorist attacks did come out of the Northwest China, done by some Islamic groups. So yeah, that did happen. But you're also, it's like, if you have to ask the question whether it's genocide, you're clearly on crimes against humanity territory. Um, they don't. It's like the only way you're going to get to talk about it is if you're like years and years deep in demonstrating your loyalty to the regime.
Mm. Go on.
Mm-hmm.
Please continue.
Yeah, it's I think like there's the Asian culture side where they like to keep a lot of discussion of problems in the family. Mm-hmm. Like, so yeah, we all know it's happening, but we're not going to talk about it, and because you're not in our family, you can't talk about it.
No, I get that. It's just, to me, I think from outsider's perspective looking in, for many of us, we look at China as this nation where the government is so obsessed with keeping control over everything. Like, for example, what we hear about the internet over there, and not being able to access outside of China. Obviously there are VPNs and stuff. I'm sure people still get access outside. Yeah. Or for instance, take WeChat as an example. That app, you can do everything with that app, but they've constructed it in that way that you have to have that app now. You have to have that in order to just kind of live in there. I mean, I don't know, what was your experience with? Did you have to own that app to do things, or were you able to sort of operate without that? Or?
Well, I didn't have a smartphone until I got back to China in 2016.
Oh, right. Okay.
I was late getting a cell phone. Actually, it wasn't until I was visiting some friends in another city here in America when I went to the train station that they would have suggested that I go to had they known that it existed. So they did get me late at night, when all the bums were out. At that point, it's like, yeah, okay, time to get a cell phone. Like once like WeChat, okay, you can pay for things, you can order train tickets, you can, like organize messages, message a bunch of people, meet up with, getting WeChat opened up life in China. It's there's just the tech dimension, like blocking outside internet. Partly it forces China's tech sector to develop. Like that part I can understand, that part I can respect. Because you don't want to be at the mercy of Silicon Valley. I totally get that. I'm an American and I don't entirely like Silicon Valley. It's like, I wish there was more, like a broader base for our tech sector. But then also, once you have an enormous corporation like that, then it's an easier handle for the government to grab, to control all of what's going on. That's also part of why I don't like Silicon Valley so much, because it's this one place, this one ethos, this one spirit, this one way of doing things. So there isn't, like, our system is an open system. You can discuss things. When we talk about problems, it's a sign of strength because we believe that problems can be resolved.
Okay, but with what you're saying there, it's like you don't like that in Silicon Valley, it's like only one way of doing things, like, okay. But at the same time, I mean, that's kind of the same with China, is it not? WeChat is this one app that's managed and owned by, or at least there's a big controlling interest from the government, and it's that there's nothing else. Like, it's not like they could use other apps. From my understanding, it's like you have to own this app to function, to live.
That's part of the network effect.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's like Facebook or Instagram.
For sure. No, for sure. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that.
Okay.
Like Facebook, a perfect example. But but at the same time, there is the ability to, like, you don't have to have Facebook to live. Do you know what I mean? You don't need to own that or have those apps on your phone in order to, for example, pay your bills, which I understand with the WeChat app, you have to have that app in order to, pay your bills.
There are other payment platforms. Like one of the things you look at going between different countries is they have all of the same stuff. It just comes in different mixes. So.
So there are other options then. You don't have to use the WeChat.
Yeah. Like America hasn't had the benefit of being completely destroyed by war for a long time. So we inherit a lot of legacy technologies. Like we still have checkbooks. Mine is in another state because when I came back to America, I came back to a different state where I had other family. I've got extended family in Texas, so I moved there rather than go back to California. Just I needed a different scene. It's like, okay, credit cards are kind of, okay, they're helpful, but they're still, 60s, 70s technology. Whereas with China, okay, they were able to they were able to take one or two steps further because they didn't have conventions that they were having to follow. So then it was easier to build like a payment platform into something like WeChat. There are other payment platforms, Alipay, Zhifubao. I never got Zhifubao. I had to get on to Alipay to use their e-commerce platform, Taobao. So there are other things. So it's there are other things. It's one of the things I find that comparing one country and another, it's important to see as much as possible what is the same, so then you can really narrow down the important differentiators.
I get that. Would you say there are any kind of like misconceptions about China? Like, obviously, because, my perspective is just everything I've read and heard about the country. But given that you were there in person, living it, is there anything that, as you lived there, you were like, oh, well, this isn't true. This isn't the reality.
It goes a few different ways. The way I put it for a lecture that I gave for my university is just kind of like, here's an alumni who's been around a bit and is coming back to give a lecture, just to, give back a bit. The way I put it was like, if we think we understand China the way that we understand the French, our mistake is thinking we understand the French. Because, okay, we're familiar with the French, but but unless you really get to know France, you don't actually know them. Whereas China, we're just so unfamiliar that everything is out there. Everything, if we have some notion that French women don't shave their armpits, okay, maybe that's true, and maybe that's a fact we know. But the fact is that human beings are, you could say, divine mysteries. Like, not that we're all gods, but that we are, like, that God created us the way that he did. And there's a lot we can find out about that, but that unless we, tell each other about ourselves, we're not going to, I can't just look at you and just know. So like China shows us our own mysteriousness. because China is mysterious, because we are mysterious, because we're all human. So everything takes time and familiarity to get to know.
Okay, but was there anything? Okay, let's say like you had an idea when you were going there of like, okay, this is what I think it might be like, and then throughout the course of living there, you were like, actually, this isn't the case. It's actually like this. Was there anything in particular that sticks out that immediately was disproven?
That's I mean, maybe one thing is like, okay, like everybody knowing kung fu or something.
Okay.
Like you'll have a lot more people who might know it because it's a local thing, or more local anyway. Or everybody eating rice. Well, no, there's also noodles. Like in North China, it's more popular to do noodles. In South China is more where you'll have the rice. They have bread. They have steamed buns called mantou. Um, um, Another thing to understand is China is a continental size country. That you like. I heard somebody say that in one of their English classes that their students said that they would sooner marry a foreigner than marry somebody from North China if they're from the South, or South China if they're from the North, because the difference might be easier to handle.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Also, Chinese is more like a family of languages than just a language with dialects. Like what they call a dialect could be as different as German from Dutch from English. Like even something like Cantonese might be more closely related to Vietnamese than Mandarin.
I get that.
Yeah.
What would you say the Western influence is like over there? Because I imagine in the major cities, you know, you're going to have, as you kind of sort of pointed out earlier, there is more touristy areas, you know, so I imagine there's probably going to be like maybe a Starbucks or a McDonald's here and there. But like in general, is there a lot of foreign influence or foreign businesses or anything like that? And what's the kind of vibe from people living in China towards foreign, let's say, businesses, products, media, etc.?
Well, foreign things in Chinese history, from what I understand, there's always the allure of the exotic. There's always the allure of the prestige luxury product. So like if you hear about the Opium War, that the Chinese emperor said, yeah, we don't need your foreign products. Well, he's putting on a show for the domestic audience, saying, okay, you know, China's better than all you. But on the side, yeah, they're buying up all the foreign stuff because it's really cool. And you know, something did keep the East India Company coming back to China, other than that they wanted tea. It was just they weren't getting enough money out of it. A friend of mine lived in another city, and he asked a friend to take him to, you know, good local food, and the friend kept taking him to KFC, McDonald's, Burger King. I'm not sure if they had Burger King out there, because those were like safe, clean things. So sometimes like foreign products can be higher quality. This is ceasing to be the case because Chinese industry is advancing, and local demand is increasing in their demands for quality.
That's interesting. So
domestic brands are more and more able to deliver.
Right. So they kind of have like almost like a perception that the foreign brands are maybe lower quality. I mean, I could understand like in general, like KFC is not going to be like fantastic quality because it's fast food. But I mean, I don't know.
well, for at least for a long time, it has been seen as some sort of quality. Like it is cool to go to KFC. Like I've in two different places in Beijing, I saw two like a KFC across the street from a KFC, and both of them are full.
Okay. So they are popular. There's
Yeah.
not like a stigma, I guess, is what I'm trying to
Oh no.
ask
Yeah.
about. Yeah. Okay. No, it was interesting because, if it were like South Korea, for example, which I know is a
Yeah.
completely different nation, but the idea we get of, South Korea is it's a very kind of westernized place. It's got its own culture, its own exports, say like K-pop, things like that are very much, from there, that's their culture kind of thing. But then they've blended that with Western culture. But China almost feels like an anomaly in that regard. It feels like it's not like that. But it's interesting to hear that they do have these businesses out there and they are received in a positive way.
Yeah, more to your question about like what influence Western things would have on China is like techniques, um, technology, business structures. Like there are parts of the Chinese government that were directly inspired by similar structures in the American government.
Mm-hmm.
So they copy that, but they make it totally their own. It's like so some of the structure of their regulatory bodies. This is stuff I've heard on podcasts, so I don't have a lot of personal stuff to back it up. But or like the way they'll structure military. They I heard that they brought over a lot from the American military. Like an American guy visited a Chinese ship and they gave him a challenge coin in much the same fashion that you would get if you visited an American military thing. That wasn't just that wasn't just doing the American thing because they heard an American was coming. But at the same time, they make it all work for Chinese purposes.
Okay.
So they'll copy all of the ways to do the things that they want to do, but it's going to be Chinese in charge.
Do they communicate that as well? Do they don't ever admit to it being influenced by the West? It's like, this is homegrown. This is something we've created. Is that kind of the prevailing message there, or is that just how it's presented?
The we did this, we created this. I believe it as far as we did this, we created this. Yeah, it's totally our own, this, that, and the other thing. Maybe not, but that's not really important because everybody's copying everybody. Like a lot of American industry so much copyright theft from British industry.
Sure, but is there like a conscious effort from them to communicate that? Did you hear anyone saying things like that?
I think it's more like they will consciously. No, I'm not sure that there is.
Fair enough. No, I was just curious about that because, again, I think from an outsider's perspective looking in, it is kind of fascinating to consider the government's kind of control on things and how they approach things and what they're telling people. I think that's the main thing I'm interested in, is what is being communicated to people. Is it like what we hear, where it's kind of people, I mean, it's never like exactly how it's presented in media. We know that. Like, I know that on the ground it's going to be different from like what, I don't know, CNN is saying. It's like, like I know that. But at the same time, I am curious because, you hear these stories every now and again of people going to prison for even just saying something that the government didn't like, or, you know what I mean? Like, you hear these stories, same as you do in Russia, for example. So it's interesting. And switching it up a little bit, actually, there's this social credit system in China. And for those listening who aren't aware of what that is, basically, it's like, from what I understand, a system in place whereby it's like a rating scale, almost like the rating scale you might have if you're using like the Uber app and you've got a rating as a customer or as a driver, positive or negative. However, the key aspect of this is that if your rating is low and you have a really low rating, that can prevent you from doing things. For example, being able to fly out of the country, being able to get a taxi, being able to do certain things. That's, in a nutshell, what we hear about the social credit system. What's your experience of the social credit system?
My personal experience goes about as I only have two sides where I really have any experience of that. One is when I've ridden on the fast train, I would hear the message in Chinese, then in English. I would understand the English one, not the Chinese one, that if certain things happen, you're not going to be allowed to ride that kind of train for up to like 6 months.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Like for example, what? Like what would you be penalized for to then mean that you couldn't travel on the train for 6 months?
Oh, like if you're smoking, if you're not following directions of train staff, if you're
Okay.
like making too much of a disturbance, if you're well, it's like, you know, like some of it might be parallel to when this one I think this lady had been a TV star, maybe even on Baywatch. Like, when was Baywatch? Is that the 80s or 90s?
I think it was the early 90s, maybe.
A former TV star apparently like had an episode on an airplane. She was picked up by the FBI because if you make trouble on like on an airplane, that's FBI jurisdiction. That's big boy jail.
Jeez.
So she was picked up by the FBI. So that is some of the kind of stuff that the social credit score system addresses. But then there's the Chinese side of it that, like, I'm not part of the Chinese system. Like, so yes, I am a Christian. I was working in Chinese media. Like most of my colleagues were members of the Communist Party of China. Okay, would a Chinese Christian get there? I don't know that they would.
Okay. So basically, it didn't really affect you much.
Yeah, because I don't speak with a local voice. I don't speak with, I don't have Chinese family. I didn't even marry into it. Like I don't have I kind of have Chinese friends, but it's not like I have an uncle who's high up in the government somewhere who can get me in, and then I can, make my own network. And I don't have any of those connections. So it's easier to shut me out.
Did you have like, in terms of this system and how it's measured, was there anything that was measured against you or people that you knew? Like, how is this system actually measured? Like, is it through an app or how is it measured?
Well, again, because I'm not Chinese, see, I had Chinese bank accounts because when I was paid, it was into a Chinese account. Chinese money to a Chinese account at a Chinese bank. I didn't even bother trying to close them all because it's like, okay, once I've got the money, it's like it's a lot of trouble to go open it. And then if I'm just leaving the country, I'm just going to leave them to deal with this inactive bank account. But anything like buying a house, anything like educating children at a good school in a certain area, getting hospital treatment. I got hospital treatment in China I had surgery to correct a hernia. But see, the thing is, I was living as a foreigner in Beijing, access to the Chinese hospitals. So like I paid in cash, but I didn't have the Chinese insurance. Like Chinese people will come to Beijing because that's where better hospitals are. So there's all this, like, so as a working adult and not somebody who's buying property, there are so many sides of things that could be blocked to me if I wanted to be a Chinese person and live there permanently. That it's like, so if I was Chinese, okay, maybe the ability to live in a good area, the ability to buy property, the ability to buy certain kinds of property, the ability to have certain kinds of jobs might be blocked to me depending on how the social credit score system works. Like there are all these little organizations like the Communist Party Youth League or your neighborhood organization or this or that volunteer thing, or these things could add to your credit score. If you're somehow part of an underground religious organization and you're found out, or something that I guess could count against you, or you can look at it in the more extreme sense. Like if you look at what's happening to people in Northwest China, or even in Tibet, if somebody has spent time abroad, that might earn you a spell in one of the camps that they've got going on. If you talk to relatives abroad all the time, okay, that might have you raked in. If you go to mosque a lot, that could get you brought in. If you grow a long beard, if you keep the Ramadan fast, if you but then also they're much more tightly controlled up there, much more tightly monitored.
So in a nutshell, it's any behavior that's erratic or doesn't fall within acceptable behaviors that they've outlined.
Yeah, it really depends who and what you are. Like if you're Chinese and you're maybe more eccentric or something, okay, well that's okay. You're part of the Han nationality. You are Chinese. Whereas if what you do is, you are a member of a class or a nationality that is more of something that the government thinks might be a problem, that's where you personally will start to have more problems.
And I mean, I know you mentioned that you didn't have any problems, but like, did you feel any pressure while you were there as a foreigner? Like, did you feel like in day-to-day life, so outside of the business and stuff, did you feel like there was a pressure to behave in a certain way, to be basically behaving yourself, or did they kind of give you a free pass because you're a foreigner?
There were a lot of times I got a free pass as a foreigner. When I bring in, okay, I am a white American. This counts very much in my favor in terms of like somebody giving me the benefit of the doubt. Like there was a time I was like my WeChat Pay didn't work for some reason, like they needed to verify my ID or something. That was really infuriating. Okay, some Chinese guy paid for me and then gave me his WeChat account so I could pay him back once I got everything going.
Wow.
It's like, okay. Or like I was...
What, just a random stranger, or where was this?
Yeah, some random stranger did this for me in Beijing.
Wow, that's pretty kind of him. What was it for though? What, you just needed help and some guy helped you?
Yeah, it's like $15 at the supermarket.
Oh wow, that's really sweet. Cool.
Yeah, so like, I have known very kind Chinese people, but there's also, if you're in somebody's in group, they will bend over backwards for you, but you're also going to do the same for them.
All right. Okay.
Like, okay, one time, okay, I was going to the city Tianjin, so I rode the fast train. Then I was getting off the fast train, getting onto the Tianjin subway or something, and like I had 3 yuan, not 4. And so the lady at the ticket desk like said, yeah, okay, whatever. Um, or maybe I didn't have the right payment platform, and they just, I forget if they didn't charge me or they forget what there was. They just kind of let me go.
See,
So like, would they have done that for somebody else? Like if I was a Black African, would they have done that for me? I don't know.
to me, it kind of sounds like, and I've been convinced of this for many years, ever since I went to the States very briefly on a holiday in like 2014.
Yeah.
And I remember just being in like a random gas station on the way to, oh gosh, maybe Las Vegas, something like that. It was in the middle of nowhere. And it was
Yeah.
also, it was boiling outside and amazingly air conditioned in the gas station. It's fantastic. Anyway, I just stood there and just watched a conversation between the cashier and the guy getting, I don't know, his petrol or whatever. And they were just chatting. Clearly they knew each other reasonably well. And this will sound silly, but at the same time, it will make sense in the context of what we're talking about. It amazed me how just normal the conversation was. You know, it wasn't like anything I've been brought up to believe, that Americans are like this, Americans are like this, you know, or Chinese are like this, Chinese are like this. It's like wherever you go in the world, life at its core is still fundamentally the same. People are just trying to live their life, do what they need to do, go home, just live a relatively easy life, you know.
Yeah.
I don't doubt the fact that like in those instances that you laid out there, some of those probably maybe it did help that you were a foreigner, you know. But I think sometimes it is just genuinely just like either people being nice or just people just making their own lives easier. Like, oh, whatever, it's a couple of dollars. Here you go, no problem. Don't worry about it. Like, you know.
Yeah. I've had a lot of those experiences as well, where it's just, I would go to the same little store near work every day, maybe 2 or 3 times a day. Like if I wanted my Skittles fix, they didn't have any Dr. Pepper though. If I, like, I knew this small store lady. I even made sure to write out a card for her in Chinese. Like, I forget if I had a colleague help me or if I ran it through Google Translate, but I laboriously did just like writing it in my, just doing it in Chinese anyway. The, yeah, the normal life poking through is like yeah, person, you know. But one part I wanted to make sure to bring in to answer your question, like I tried to be very careful to not be that foreigner. Like I did have a few times when I flipped out because I have a bit of a short temper, so more times than I would like to admit. But like I tried to be like, I tried to not be that foreigner, because China is basically like a sea that you're riding a small boat over the top of. And if you have a good relationship with the sea, you won't drown. But you really, really need to respect what you're dealing with, because there is no defeating China. Like anything that, like everything foreign that has come into China has been made Chinese.
Now that's interesting. That point right there. So basically, I mean, every country will have a degree of patriotism or whatever, but like more often than not, you hear about things being integrated. Like here in the UK, we have many kind of foreign influences that have become part of British culture, but they are still fundamentally foreign. So, for example, kebab shops are pretty common here, but they are still Turkish or, you know, wherever they originate from. They still got that vibe in there, like, you know, that the presence of the culture is still very prominent in there. It just happens to have been integrated within our culture. But what you're saying is interesting, because you're saying they basically take the foreign things and they make it their own. They put their own spin on it or something like that.
Well, it's like, say, cities like Shanghai, which became a lot of what they are today because of interaction with the outside. They're completely Chinese owned and operated now. That um, like one of my favorite books is Moby Dick. I I referenced this in a lecture at a university I was teaching at in China. They needed a professor somebody, and I was that professor somebody because I couldn't find who they needed. So I just anyway. So you like in Moby Dick, you have all these foreigners who are the harpooneers, who are but the rich people who own big homes in Nantucket, they're all native born Americans. So you might have foreign executives come over and make a lot of money, but who owns everything at the end of the day? The Chinese do. There's a YouTuber called Serpent ZA, that for Z being Z, so Serpent ZA. I think he shows, like, if you watch a lot of his YouTube videos, it's a good substitute for being in China. I would maybe look at some of his earlier videos. A lot of his later videos lean a little more. He has a little bit more of a message in some of the later videos. I'm not going to use the propaganda word, but
this is interesting. So he's like a foreigner who's moved there, and now he's
in America now.
Okay.
He's traveled all over China. He has footage from all over China. So he can give you a lot of good, really hard data. But I take him with a little bit of a grain of salt, but still I largely trust him to be telling the truth.
Okay.
What was it that we were talking about, right? I forgot why I brought him up.
Well, I think basically with China, it's like, as you said, like this idea that that they want to have ownership over everything and make things their own. That was kind of the prevailing narrative that we were discussing. And I mean, that much is very clear. But it's interesting how you said before that they make things their own. I find that very interesting. I think it shows a commitment to keeping things the way they want it to be. And as you said, like in the very beginning of all of this idea, this commitment to pushing local versus international. I mean, that's a problem I think that we have here in the UK, is that there's too much of a focus on imports as opposed to exports. I think that's always a problem in any country. You got to focus on what you're creating and what you're producing and giving to the world, from an economic standpoint, not just culturally, but just to keep your nation going. I think that because China's done that, it's probably really helped them when it comes to business and everything else. And of course, we know that so many products and various different things are manufactured in China, normally to save money, but for them, that's going to benefit them a lot because there's so much business coming in for them, but they're also still fundamentally creating, and doing things their way.
Yeah. Like that's one of the things that I'm exploring in my podcast is it's like China's rearticulation of its own identity over the course of all the changes, like going from being a dynasty to a complete overhaul of society from 1839 to the present, like just all the things that happened. China is still China, and I think it is wrong to say that like that China was invented. So, no, it was rearticulated, maybe in a revolutionary fashion, but even if you go from France under King Louis, whatever number, to today, Republic 1, 2, 3, 4, Napoleon 1, Napoleon 3, it's still France. Even though then there's a sharp distinction between Roman Gaul and France, that it is still one thing, and China keeps coming back.
That's the quote right there, isn't it? China keeps coming back.
Oh yeah.
What would you say were the best and worst things about day-to-day life in China?
Well, I mean, some of the things that I wanted to say are actually things that I was told that we want to find people to write articles other than about that. It's so easy to say, oh yeah, the public transportation is so convenient, everything's so modern, there's that, the other thing. Well, I mean, Chinese parks can be quite nice. Maybe it depends what city you're in, but I really like Chinese parks. Another thing I like is that China feels like it is meaningfully full of people, where it seems like people want to make, some, especially some of the more extreme environmentalist sides of things, they want to make people out to be the problem. Is no, people is us. We are people. China feels it feels meaningfully full of people, whereas like in America, it seems like we're trying to do without people. Make machines to do things. No, in China, you'll have 3 or 4 guys sweeping the street. You just have so many people. It's nice to see that many people. It wears upon you that they one thing that I didn't really appreciate. One thing that I came to appreciate after a number of years is I like being around people who look like me.
Okay.
There's
so you felt kind of alone being the foreigner there, in a sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that is one of the. It's hard if.
Did you feel a lot of loneliness when you were there?
Oh yeah. I mean, some of the best things I did for myself were to go out and find interests to get involved in, to meet other people, just to, I mean, even have a bunch of acquaintances, if not really, really close friends or something. It's I need people who I can talk to in English at native speed and making native English language jokes. And I can't just watch TV shows and movies and stuff. I need to be able to have a dynamic conversation with real people.
Yeah, no, it's a difficult one. I can reciprocate. I lived in Europe for a number of years, and the first language was not English. I mean, they did speak English, but it got difficult sometimes. Yeah, hearing it all the time and knowing that's you got to make a conscious effort to learn the language to an extent and get by and stuff. And yeah, damn, it can be lonely. It can be real lonely sometimes. It's a hard one. One thing I wanted to. So you were. When did you leave China? What year?
2021, March 2021.
So this is interesting. So you would have been in China during the outbreak of COVID-19.
Yeah, I was working in Chinese media when COVID-19 broke out.
Okay, I got to get your thoughts on this, what it was like for you on the ground. What was it like experiencing that firsthand in China?
I thankfully avoided any quarantine time. I went, okay, so I was in Beijing for this. It was really, really taking off right as Chinese New Year was setting in. That's when China shuts down anyway. I had a Chinese friend who from Wuhan. He was actually out in the countryside with his father at the time, so he did the Wuhan lockdown out in the countryside. I don't know how much better or worse that was. Apparently, he had to drink a lot with his father, because like otherwise, Dad's going to be drinking alone or something. Like, so normally Beijing is dead during Chinese New Year. Just all the lights are off, nobody's home, everybody's gone back to somewhere, or they're just sitting around the house watching Chinese TV. Or like, Chinese people work hard all the time. Chinese New Year is one of the times when they don't. They just don't, and that is good. So where the normal holiday shutdown handed off to the something demic, hope it's not going to be a pandemic, takes over, was kind of hard to, like, the residential compound I was living in, like, they were starting to block off exits. So like, okay, this thing that's normally open is now closed, so go out this other way, now that's taped off. And then after a few more days, they took down my information to give me a pass so that I could show that I lived there, and so I could come and go from the place where I lived. And then weeks and months would go by. Like, so a restaurant where I'd been going, they took down like my name and phone number so that if there was an outbreak, they could trace me. Then they figured out an app, which I still had. I just did it through WeChat. Okay, yeah, there again. Okay, WeChat being a critical part of life infrastructure. Like, so if you're green, you're good. If you're yellow, and then red is like, okay, we're packing you off to somewhere to make sure you don't have the thing.
Did you see that? Did they do that?
Oh no, I never saw that. Thankfully, I only ever had green.
But that did that happen to people you knew? Like, they were taken away somewhere?
No, that never happened to anybody I knew.
But it did happen.
Yeah. Wow. That's the like, yeah, it happened. Like, on the one side, it's not as bad as the foreign media was showing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it seemed like you never start a war with as much ammunition as you need. So like, yeah, they're running short of masks. There's lots of people in the hospitals. Yeah, because they don't plan for pandemics all the time. But then on the other side, China, yeah, we built a hospital in 10 days. Yeah, you brought together some prefabricated structures that were already built. So yeah, you brought out emergency supplies and set up a thing. It's like yeah, and nobody talks about America setting up a hospital in Central Park or something really, really fast. Like, yeah, it's called an Army Field Hospital, whatever it is.
Given that you were working in media at the time, was there anything that you were seeing? Did you have to kind of obscure the truth, or was there anything that you had to print that wasn't the case? Like, tell us a little bit about that.
Partly, on one side, the Chinese media narrative is like very much a cheerleading kind of thing. Like yeah, we're fighting this, we're dealing with it, we're tackling it. But then the other, like, there's just a lot they just might not talk about. Eventually, officials in Wuhan were punished, dismissed, imprisoned, fined, whatever it was that happened. But it's always about the party leadership in Beijing fixing things, rather than, my goodness, maybe it's not so good to live in an authoritarian system that makes it hard to tell the truth when that comes up. So like the guy who was punished locally but then later lauded as a hero, even though he died of COVID-19 for trying to bring it out to the world. So maybe somebody will be punished locally, but then as things go by, they're reclassified as a hero. and if they're safely dead, it's even easier, because then they're not there to set the record in any other way than what the government would like to say is straight. Like it's like okay, if we compare it to America, it's like, okay, so these nurses sharing stories of shortages of supplies, and there's I don't know, I don't know where to draw the line between sharing the truth and sharing unhelpful extra details about a situation that's already difficult. Like what's telling the truth versus like we need to stick together and deal with this thing, but also like we don't like what's the appropriate amount of detail? Like if protective equipment doesn't exist, like, okay, so is that so if that's a scandal, okay, so like where do we, so like in Chinese media, they're talking about, we're working hard on it, we're really really working hard on it, and like that's what they keep saying, which okay, like there's a certain focusing thing, like for me even, like that was encouraging. But then like if there's a side on the Chinese language media where they talk about, you know, fixing shortcomings and all that, I don't know about it because I don't read Chinese language media, because I just can't. Also, one thing to understand about Chinese media is that it's more didactic and preachy than it will ever be threatening. So like Fox News in America talked about, yeah, they're threatening to drop us in a sea of coronavirus. No, they're making a moralistic metaphor. Like, if we did to you what you're doing to us, that would be like dropping you in a sea of coronavirus. Like it's more moralistic and preachy than like threatening. Though you do have, it's just a detail I wanted to. Okay, so ask me another question so I can focus on it, like the right thing.
Oh, you're actually asking
yes,
me?
Yes. Yeah. Like I so easy to go on off on a rabbit trail. So I don't know if I'm.
No, I mean, I just wanted to kind of get an idea of I guess
Yeah.
what it was like actually being there during that, because I think it's one thing hearing about stories from afar, but actually being there. I mean, I think the biggest thing is like, firstly, how many people actually lived there? It's like 1 billion, isn't it? Over 1 billion people live in China.
Yeah.
And you know, I mean, it's like, how do you even begin to contain that? Like, I think it was ambitious for them to try, and I applaud them for trying to do so. But I mean, it was inevitable. I remember as soon as I heard that, you know, there were like teachers that had like flown back from China, like that flights coming back from China, like around the time, not just when it sort of broke out around the world, but I think like the first outbreaks were in like November 2019 or something. I seem to recall there being stories then, and then obviously gradually into 2020 is when it happened. So this was happening over some time. Like, it was, you know,
I had actually gone to Romania at the end of December 2019, came back to China beginning of like New Year's Day 2020. So like I got back just in time for the fun to begin. I actually renewed my work contract maybe March 2020. Part of that was like, I want to stay in place because my life is in China. Like, a friend of mine had been teaching English, and he and his family went to Vietnam. Like his parents came over to visit him, that family, and they just went back to Canada, and he just decided to have friends in the city he was living in send the most valuable stuff to him, and then just keep the rest of it, rather than come back to China because the school wasn't. So for me, being in Chinese media, it's like the Chinese government is a consistent customer. So It's not like my job was really going to change very much. So I just stayed in place because it's like I didn't. It's like I didn't have money to run away to America and hope this all blows over. Another thing is as they were as they were bringing in the epidemic control measures, like the red, yellow, green system that I talked about on WeChat. Well, it took a while for that to roll out for foreigners because our IDs aren't in the Chinese system. You have like you have a Chinese ID card. In certain places, you can just hold that up to a machine and they register that you were there. It's all in the system. But like for foreigner, like they might have to get out a clipboard and actually write out your name and your passport number and phone number, and because you're not in that system. So it took a while for them to integrate all of that for the once it all worked, then you could just scan a QR code when you go into a restaurant and register that you were there and show that you're green because you hadn't been anywhere else where there had been an outbreak. So that was another level of being a foreigner there, where the Chinese probably got it a lot faster because they're all in the system.
Thank you very much for sharing. Let's switch it up a little bit. What's the best advice you've ever received?
For being in China or just in general?
In life.
I'll go with this one. It's usually people get lost before they go far enough. This is something that I had when I was first in China. It took me 10 minutes to walk somewhere, and then it took me an hour and a half to get back. And during that time, I think I walked down the correct street like 3 times, but I didn't go far enough. So other times, I have not gotten lost because I remembered, okay, go further. Aha, here we go. Yeah, there it is. That there's a number of other ways that applies as well, because going far enough, it is like it's like so many things. Like if you're studying in university, if you're in a career, until you really turn the corner, it might feel like you just can't take it anymore, but just a little further, you'll make it.
Brilliant. Thanks for sharing. And my favorite question that I ask all my guests, what's the biggest life lesson you've learned so far?
Maybe one thing is all the things that now, I mean, like many people have dysfunctional childhoods, but many of the things that you learned that were true when you were a child, they're still true when you're an adult. I'm trying to avoid putting it in religious terms just because it's so easy to turn to that. It's so easy to just say, okay, at the end of Harry Potter, it's like Harry literally has to choose to believe in Dumbledore. There's that goodness exists. That beauty is a thing that exists, whether or not you understand it or appreciate it. That truth is a thing. Like even if it's convenient to tell a lie because it gets you somewhere faster, that truth is still worth choosing to believe in. This is like all the stuff that you learned as a child, it's still true. And continuing to believe is a choice. Is like the truth doesn't just install itself like an app from the app store in your brain. You have to keep making that choice. Like ideals are like the sun and moon. It's like you may never touch them, but you still need them exactly where they are.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing. As we draw things to a close for today, do you have any upcoming projects or some final thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners?
I mean, the copywriting thing is going to take a long time to work to come out. My podcast at ChineseRevolutions.com. I always like doing it with the www dot. It's just easier to drop. But ChineseRevolutions.com. This week, I think we're talking about Chinese politics. I might just scrape stuff from Wikipedia because it's just very broad context. But that's something I'm working on right now.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for being on the show. It's been really interesting listening to your experiences in China, and I wish you the best of luck with the podcast and your future endeavors.
And thanks a ton for having me on.
Thank you. And to all the listeners of the Christian Reeve Podcast, as always, be safe, be well, and I'll see you in the next one.